Iraq has miscalculated the Western alliance's resolve to use force if she does not withdraw. The assumption being that if the Allies go to war, they'll win. But rather than miscalculating the West's resolve, it's beginning to look as if Saddam Hussein may actually be calculating that war could offer him a better deal, not least because he reckons the alternative looks worse. A withdrawal from Kuwait without some gains on the Palestinian issue would shatter his aspirations to lead the Arab world and might increase the risk of an internal coup. And while he would still retain his military strength, this would most likely be restrained in the future, probably by a continued Western presence in the Gulf. Economically, he would be worse off than before the occupation of Kuwait. The last 5 months has cost Iraq about $12 billion in lost revenue. And now he faces claims for Kuwait's reconstruction, and wariness on the part of potential investors and financiers. War, on the other hand, could in due course get Saddam a better deal by his reckoning. He may regard an Allied victory through an airstrike as by no means assured, and considers himself well defended against a land invasion. If he can hold out for long enough, he may believe he can impose such casualties on the opposing forces that the Western alliance would call for a ceasefire and even accept peace on terms that have at present been rejected. Saddam may calculate that even if he is forced out of Kuwait by the US-led alliance, he could stay in power in Iraq by claiming to be the only Arab ready to stand up to the West. He may also calculate that if Israel becomes involved, the alliance would collapse as Arab countries drop out of the coalition. So could it be it's the West that's miscalculated? Saddam may not doubt the alliance's resolve to fight, but its ability to win. Whatever win means in this context. Joining the discussion now is Air Commodore Alistair Mackie, a former director of the Royal Air Force's Air Staff Briefing. We're struggling to understand options and their consequences, with less information, of course, than the people in the field. In your view, assuming that force were used, can the Allies guarantee victory?
Of course they can't. No war has ever been fought that guaranteed victory. And there are some reasons that the unmentionable might actually happen. We might lose.
Seriously?
Seriously.
But we have the largest force. We're told again and again our troops are better prepared, better equipped, much greater. How can we lose?
Well, numbers mean nothing. We're told that because the air is thick with disinformation. And the American Air Forces, which are all that really count in the initial stages, are unbelievably lopsided. They're very good at what they call winning the air battle, and they're very good at blasting people to pieces, as they did in Libya. And no doubt they can flatten lots of targets. What they can't do is to assist our soldiers and the American soldiers in what could be a most murderous effort to recapture Kuwait, because the close air support is not at all what it should be and never has been for many years in that Air Force.
Richard Allen, is that kind of information from Alistair Mackie why you suggest a 4 to 6 week window after the January 15th deadline is reached?
Well, not at all, because I don't happen to agree with all due respect to Air Commodore Mackie. I believe that we have the capacity to strike and strike effectively from the air, to suppress Saddam Hussein's offensive capabilities in the first hours and days of the action, to suppress his defensive capabilities, and to hit its selected military targets using modern technologies. I think that will then bring about a period of pause. We should pause at that point to explore possible diplomatic openings, possible willingness of Saddam Hussein, if he is still around at that time, to negotiate. If not, then I think we will re-intensify that activity for a period of days, and perhaps again pause. So there are various and alternative military strategies that can be employed here. No one is for sending in massive amounts of American and or Allied troops on the ground until such time as there's a reasonable chance that they can survive.
Alistair Mackie, is that what you would classify as disinformation?
That is a very genteel version of what got the head of the American Air Force sacked for blabbing off his mouth about the capabilities of
What's
American
your crude
air
version?
power. My crude version is this, that those air forces may very well be insufficient to support our ground forces. By our, I mean the coalition that we can't call an alliance, in their effort to get into Kuwait. Saddam's forces are well dug in. They've got good defences. They've been fighting for several years. Their communications are excellent. On the whole, their equipment is pretty good.
Richard Allen.
Well, that's one approach to military strategy, and that's one that may indeed be followed. But I don't believe that anyone needs to worry about entering Kuwait on the ground at the present time because of the uncertainties that Commodore Mackey just mentioned. That's why, devoid of communications, devoid of the center, if the attack takes place in Iraq, the Iraqi forces on the ground in Kuwait are going to have a hard time sustaining themselves.
Let me bring in Gaitar Manazi here, who is the editor of Arab Affairs, and you are yourself a Syrian. Syria makes up the second largest of the Arab forces in the multinational alliance. How do you respond to this difference of view?
With regard to military matters, I'm afraid it's very difficult to judge. All I can say is that if President Saddam Hussein is bent on fighting it out, as some people are saying, and it's a big if, then he may be thinking of the experience, the historical experience of 1956, when President Nasser was able to withstand a military assault, but came out the victor politically in the end. That may be at the back of his mind. But there's a cautionary side to all this, of course. There's the example 11 years after that of the war of June 67, which had the completely opposite effect.
Let me ask you this, Mr. Al-Manazi. Yesterday, the US Defense Secretary Dick Cheney was talking about the objective of any kind of military action in the Gulf and said that although the US was not in the business of going into Iraq, Saddam Hussein should not see Baghdad as a sanctuary. Now, the implication of that is that Iraq could be breached too. What would be the response of Arab forces in the alliance to that?
Well, the Arab section of the alliance are clear in what they have declared, and that they are in this alliance in order to defend Saudi Arabia, which was the reasoning at the beginning, and also to liberate perhaps Kuwait. So I think they would, of course, balk at any possibility, any prospect of the war extending into Iraq. That is not their strategy, that is not their objective.
Of course, that sanctuary is another bit of speak of the worst kind. The military fact is that you cannot isolate the recapture of Kuwait unless you're going to try and purchase it with soldiers' lives as they did in 1915. There must be diversions. Perhaps there will be a slow land advance towards Baghdad or Basra to draw off some of that huge Iraqi potential. Perhaps there will be massing of forces on the Syrian border, on the Turkish border, even on the Iranian border. We know there will be terrorism in all the capitals of the coalition. It is inevitably far, far wider than that. And sanctuary is simply code for we're going into Iraq. They've got to.
Richard Allen, is it possible to achieve Resolution 660 without going into Iraq?
I don't think so. And I think that ultimately the objectives of this action must be extended to deal with Saddam Hussein and his future.
But Mr. Al-Manazi has said that will effectively split the international alliance. That's tough, is it?
That's a very strong probability. This is not the tightest of alliances. This is not the North Atlantic Treaty Organization.
Well, even that wouldn't be saying much, but the fact is that the Americans want Saddam's head on a charger to keep the American public
Which
opinion.
Which Americans have said that, Commodore?
I'm not conscious of anybody saying it because it wouldn't be very good disinformation.
Let me bring in Claude Cheysson again. We have representatives non-practicing of the various elements of the alliance. Claude Cheysson, do you see this difference of view actually demonstrating a potential split in the alliance? And does it matter?
Well, I think it's a great mistake to consider the war only in Iraq and in its classical form. Saddam Hussein, if there is war, will immediately extend war beyond Iraq and will immediately use modes of fighting that will go far beyond classical war.
Absolutely.
For instance, to put 3,000 oil wells in Kuwait in flames, what will be exactly the impact in the whole area? Secondly, no doubt that Israel will be brought in that war. Saddam Hussein will see to that. Once Israel is in the picture, what will be the reaction among the Arab people? the Arab people in all countries? What will be the immediate threats against their governments? Will any moderate Arab government survive?
Let me
such
put
a
that
war?
to Mr. Al-Manazi, since he's here. Would you agree that it would be inevitable, should war be started, that Israel would come in? And Monsieur Chesson suggests that would split the Arab coalition
Well,
completely.
it's very important to monitor.
Agree. I'm sorry, I would
Sorry, Richard, can I just get Mr.
It's very
Al-Manazi?
important to monitor the behavior of Israel. At the moment, Israel is pushing, of course, for war. That is its objective. That is its strategy. So it's trying to tell the Americans and trying to assure them that to be very well behaved in order to get the war started. But there's every possibility that once the war starts, Israel will have another agenda altogether.
Richard
to
Allen, you've
operate on.
suggested it is
That's exactly my
possible to
opinion.
contain military action. Monsieur Chesson says once war is begun, it is impossible. It is licensing anarchy and chaos. Is that not the case?
I don't agree. I don't agree that I said that. I don't believe it's possible to contain the war. I believe that if Saddam Hussein decides that he's going to strike at Israel, that will definitely happen. And I also agree that there is only a chance that Israel will be totally restrained.
Meanwhile, the
And I f-
coalition is looking a little risky, is it not?
Yes, indeed, of course it is. As I said, it is not a tight coalition.
So the
Not at
US
all.
is
But
prepared
I
to
do
go
hope
it
that
alone?
I do. Well, I think Britain has pretty well indicated that it will stand with the United States, and there may be some others out of this fragile coalition that will stand with us and complete the task.
It's
Mine-
as well to bear in mind the fact that Britain is struggling to constitute 5% of the total force. And of course, even as the British soldiers are under military command of the Americans, the British government is under command of the American government
Gentlemen,
for this operation.
We have
I
to
wish
leave
this
it
would have been
there.
the case in the Falkland Islands
Thank
as well.
you very much indeed.
Yeah.
4 to 6 weeks, said Richard Allen. We'll see. Well, although we've been discussing the consequences of a war breaking out, there's still a chance for peace with the UN Secretary-General, Mr. Perez de Cuellar, who is in Baghdad. The United Nations has been the forum for debate and has passed the resolutions condemning Iraq's invasion of Kuwait. But up until now, Mr. Perez de Cuellar has kept a relatively low profile. Lee Sellers now examines the man and the organisation set up to maintain peace in the world, but which may now not be able to prevent it slipping towards war.
To provide a ladder for the Iraqi leader to climb down. That's what the experts say is the mission of this man, the UN Secretary-General. And that may be the very most he can achieve in Baghdad. Javier Perez de Cuellar, the 70-year-old Peruvian diplomat, renowned for his low-key style, patience and extreme courtesy, is entering his 10th and, in theory, final year of office. He may yet be remembered as the man who presided over the renaissance of the United Nations as a viable force. His successes are not inconsiderable. He helped negotiate an end to the Iran-Iraq War in 1988. But by then the war had been going on for 8 years with few gains on either side. And he was instrumental in getting the Soviets out of Afghanistan. But then again, it was 10 years after they'd invaded, and more than 1 million had died. He also witnessed Namibian Independence Day and an end to South Africa's claim to rights over the territory it had controlled since 1915. The United Nations was set up after the horrors of World War II. Its role was to be the League of Nations with teeth, based on the pre-war organization, but this time with its own army controlled by the chiefs of staff of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council: the United States, the Soviet Union, Britain, France and China. The peacekeeping forces were to be the instruments of international law in the new ideal world. But the world wasn't ideal for long. The Cold War meant the end of consensus, and the UN became a place for the superpowers to thwart each other's interests. At best, a talking shop, at worst, an irrelevance. Since the end of the Cold War, assuming Moscow doesn't revert to its old ways, the UN now has a chance for rebirth. But ironically, it's the new consensus against Iraq that has brought the Organization of Peace to the point of war. The UN has been involved in many wars before, but with little effect, save a vague moral presence. The peacekeeping forces are only authorized to fire arms in self-defense, so the idea of teeth has become almost meaningless. We're only allowed to shoot after we've been shot at, say the soldiers. The UN forces in Lebanon, winners of the Nobel Peace Prize, were powerless to stop Israel's invasion. So the UN has the will but not the way to prevent war. Whatever the recent resolutions say about immediate and unconditional withdrawal from Kuwait, the most Mr. Perez de Cuellar can really do in Baghdad is rely on his personal powers of persuasion. As a Beirut resident once said, if UN resolutions were effective, all the wars across the world would have ended by now.
Lee Sellers, we will of course bring you any news on the talks in Baghdad before the end of the programme if we have it. And we'll take a break there. After that, Ed Sturton's review of the world this week and Gorbachev's crackdown in the Soviet Union. Welcome back. At this moment, the Lithuanian government is maintaining a vigil in the Parliament building in Vilnius as Soviet troops hold public buildings in the city. We'll be speaking directly to the Parliament, but first, Ed Sturton with his look at the world this week.
5 years ago, the people of Haiti ended the dictatorship of the Duvalier family, who, father and son, or papa and baby as they were known, had ruled the Caribbean nation for nearly 3 decades. Covering that rebellion, many of us were shocked by the savagery with which the Haitians rounded on the Tonton Macoute, the Duvalier militia. It was almost as if they were trying to scrub the country clean with blood. It seems they may not have scrubbed hard enough. This week, a former Tonton Macoute led a coup. It only lasted half a day, but 75 people died. And it was a reminder of the fragility of Haiti's democracy. It came less than a month after Haitians finally succeeded in holding a free and fair election, returning a radical Roman Catholic priest as president. Derek Williamson.
The army played an unfamiliar role in this week's coup in Haiti. For the first time in the country's turbulent history, it came down on the side of democracy and won the hearts of the people. Earlier, crowds had surrounded the presidential palace in Port-au-Prince as acting president Berthe Pascal Triot was forced to appear on television to announce her resignation. She was followed by the coup leader, Roger Lafontaine, who claimed to have acted at the request of the police and the armed forces. But 11.5 hours later, he was in custody, his handful of cohorts arrested or dead. Avenging mobs took to the streets. The victims, hacked or burned to death, were people associated with the former regimes of Papa and Baby Doc Duvalier and their notorious henchman, the Tonton Macoute. It had been a very different crowd which had filled the capital 3 weeks earlier, celebrating democracy after 30 years of dictatorship and oppression. And the election of Father Jean-Bertrand Aristide, a liberation theology priest who won almost 2/3 of the vote. He's due to be sworn in on February the 7th.
Nous voulons continuer à nettoyer le pays, débarrasser le pays de ces macoutes pour finalement bâtir la nouvelle Haïti, l'Haïti où tous auront de quoi manger. Le pain de l'instruction, le pain de l'éducation, le pain de la liberté, le pain du respect.
Freeing Haiti from the violence of the Tonton Macoute and the corruption of previous successors to the Duvaliers is not the only problem confronting the new president. The systematic plundering of this country has left most of the 6.5 million people desperately poor. On the streets of the capital, people try to eke out a living on the black market, selling cheap plastic trash, usually smuggled into the country. But those who avoid the slums of the cities fare little better in the countryside. Only 1% of what used to be tropical rainforest is left standing. Over-farming has left most of the land exhausted and barren. Another Duvalierist legacy is the so-called loan improvement companies, all American-owned, making cheap textiles, toys or leather goods for export to the US. The average wage here is the equivalent of between £1.50 and £3 a day.
Mais en même temps, l'aide internationale, qui a été quand même assez importante dans les 20 dernières années, n'a servi qu'à enrichir ceux qui étaient déjà riches et à rendre plus pauvres ceux qui étaient déjà pauvres.
The slogan on the wall reads justice and truth. the achievement of social justice in this most unequal of Caribbean societies will be how these people judge the incoming president.
While the week's been dominated by the brinkmanship and diplomatic poker over the Gulf crisis, other regional disputes have had to take second place in the headlines.
Somalia, in the footsteps of death by violence, death by disease. Medical supplies in the capital, Mogadishu, have been exhausted. President Siad Barre is still said to be in control despite 2 weeks of fierce fighting, though the rebels claim the president has fled. In Sri Lanka, the government has ended a 10-day ceasefire with the Tamil insurgents. The government said the Tamils had used the ceasefire to build up arms. In Colombia, a second guerrilla group has made peace with the government, but it's unlikely to make much difference to the killing. 35 have died in the past 2 days. The day after being elected president of Guatemala, Jorge Serrano announced his first cabinet, but left the critical defence post empty until he's talked to the army, as he put it. And in South Africa, Willem de Klerk, son of the president, is said to have become engaged. Nothing remarkable in that, except that his intended is what white South Africans call a coloured. From the son, a forceful reminder of the change the father has presided over.
Whenever ministers of the European community gather, there's always a certain amount of grandstanding, the more powerful members of the community jostling with one another to get their version of events across to the press. Yesterday, at the meeting of EC ministers with the UN Secretary-General in Geneva, it was not the French, the Germans or the British, but the Portuguese foreign minister who stole the show, revealing proposals for a so-called five-point plan for peace. That he felt the confidence to do so, and that the world listened, is a reminder of the change in Portugal's status. The man who's largely responsible for transforming what used to be the poor man of Europe is Mario Soares. And tomorrow the voters will pass their verdict on his efforts. Caroline Leffman.
President Mario Soares on the campaign trail meets the electorate in a working-class district of Lisbon. His popular image as a godfather figure to the nation looks set to propel him into another 5-year term. During a turbulent political career spanning more than 45 years, he's been involved in Portugal's emergence from political and economic isolation. After the revolution in 1974, which ended 50 years of right-wing dictatorship, Soares oversaw the country's decolonisation programme. Then, as Prime Minister at the head of his own previously banned Socialist Party, he took Portugal into the European community. There's a new confidence now based on rapid economic development. Foreign investors, attracted by low unemployment and low wages, have stimulated high growth, the highest in Europe. The current Prime Minister, Anibal Cavaco Silva, and his government can take much of the credit for this economic miracle. And Mr. Silva's Social Democrats are so confident in their socialist president that they haven't even fielded their own candidate for tomorrow's elections. But there are problems. Portugal's history is inextricably linked with the sea. More than 500 miles of rugged coastline have shaped a nation of seafarers who well into the 20th century were influencing other continents. The fishing industry still provides employment for many people, but catch quotas and international competition are jeopardising its survival. Agriculture is suffering too. The post-revolution cooperative farms proved largely unsuccessful, and many owners who lost their land are returning to their estates. A privatisation programme planned for the nationalised steel industry means 6,000 workers will lose their jobs. The economy has dominated the election campaign. Communist and left-wing candidates have talked of a sellout of businesses and of widening social divisions. The right has tried to frighten voters, saying the real socialist Soares is about to reveal himself. But as the campaigning ended, President Soares still held a convincing lead in the opinion polls. Brushing aside criticism, he said of his opponents, "If it wasn't for me, they wouldn't have a campaign in the first place."
Portugal, of course, only a democracy since 1974. The Baltic states are now struggling to join the club of European democracies. We have a discussion on the crisis there. Sheena.
Well, this week, Lithuania's worst fears seemed realised when Soviet tanks rolled into Vilnius and government buildings were taken over by troops. But is President Gorbachev already having second thoughts? Joining us by phone now from Vilnius is Romanas Bogdanas, who is an advisor to President Vytautas Landsbergis, specialising in foreign affairs. Mr. Bogdanas, thank you very much indeed for joining us. What has happened today?
You know, there was no break from yesterday. We had no night, in fact, because the events were covering each other.
You're in the
every hour.
parliamentary building, are you? You're sitting in the parliamentary building with the president.
Yeah, already 48 hours or maybe more.
Are there still
Because
people?
let's say tonight at 3 a.m., the Soviets entered the special police force quarters and apprehended all the young men there. And then later on, the Soviets arrived to the police academy, and there were 600 trainers staying there. But when they informed the Soviets that they are armed and they would resist, the Soviets left. But the army was still staying surrounding the building of the police academy. Early in the morning, the telefax systems of Lithuanian telegram agents and news agency was not functioning. But early in the morning, something, the sky became more clear when we heard about the decision, the statement of the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet of the Russian Federation. And that statement goes that the use of military force against the residents of the three republics, the Baltic republics, would be illegal, and the Presidium asked to retreat the Soviet army troops from the Baltic states.
Yes, we understand that Mr. Yeltsin, the president of the Russian Federation, said that Russian soldiers should not fight or get involved in any military action in the Baltic republics, principally, of course, in Lithuania at the moment. Has it therefore been quiet today?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it was really quiet, because let's say today we had victims. The Soviet military truck get into the accident.
But nobody has tried to enter the parliamentary building, Mr. Bogdanas.
Oh, there's a lot of people surrounding the building even now.
Soviet troops?
No, not the Soviet troops, but the people who came here to support the parliament and to defend it with their presence here.
I understand, Mr. Bogdanas, that the Federation Council in Moscow of the Supreme Soviet has said that it is vital to resolve all conflicts in the republics by political means. Are you optimistic that Mr. Gorbachev may back off, call the tanks out and step back from using force?
I would say it's better not to take the tank in and then not to use the words, we take the tanks out. It's better to deal without any tanks.
What will happen next, do you think?
It seems that the Soviets, after many statements of Western countries and after the support of the Lithuanian people who expressed it very firmly, defending with their presence the buildings, the governmental buildings here, I think that the Soviet Union realized that this is not the way to act, and now they have chosen a civilized way, and we are expecting to receive a delegation from the Federal Soviet, which arrives tomorrow.
Right. At this point, Mr. Bogdanas, thank you very much indeed. I'd like to go to Moscow, where Yuri Khan, who is the Estonian representative in Moscow, is joining us. Now, Estonia might expect the same kind of treatment next week, because their draft conscription levels have to be met by Tuesday. Obviously, Estonia, like Lithuania, will not meet levels. Are you expecting Soviet tanks in Tallinn?
We got today at morning a very threatening message from Mr. Kuzmin, chief of Baltic Military District, and he said that he is ready to send 2,000 paratroops to our territory tomorrow.
So you too are being threatened by force?
Yes, of course.
How will you respond in Estonia? Mr. Bogdanas in Lithuania says the people of Vilnius are in the streets surrounding the building, protecting the building, if you like, from the troops who are there. Will there be similar demonstrations in Estonia?
We haven't troops yet in our streets. We have only got message about plan of Mr. Kuzmin to send troops in our streets tomorrow. But today Mr. Savisaar has opportunity to meet Mr. Yazov and Mr. Gorbachev and asked about planning of military leadership of Soviet Union. Mr. Yazov said that he haven't any ideas about this ordering, and if Mr. Kuzmin or somebody else plan to use force in Estonia, it's only a provocation.
Right, only a threat, but you think it may not now happen because of the reaction to what happened in Lithuania this week?
It's not planned by all Union military authorities, said Mr. Yazov.
Let me bring in Romas Kinka, who is the official spokesman for Sąjūdis, the Lithuanian freedom movement. Mr. Gorbachev has made a big misjudgment, do you think? Is he now trying to back off?
No, I think this actually is a classic Bolshevik interrogation technique. The first thing you do is you go in and rough up your victim, torture him, and then you get him to sign a document admitting his guilt.
You don't sound optimistic. You don't sound as if these noises about solving conflicts by political means and sending in delegations
No, I wouldn't
actually...
buy a used car from Mr. Gorbachev today.
What will happen, do you think, then? You think that the roughening up is going to continue?
Absolutely. And if anything, I think there will be an escalation. It simply, of course, depends on what Gorbachev thinks he will get out of the Estonians and the Latvians in the process. But, of course, it is not a coincidence that he chose yesterday to send the paratroopers in to storm the buildings, because, of course, the Federation Council meeting met today. It's also, if you like, a lesson to the other leaders of the other republics.
But today, Boris Yeltsin, president of the Russian Federation, said Russian soldiers shouldn't fight or get involved. And, of course, we've also seen Russian demonstrations on the streets of Vilnius against the nationalist demonstrations by your colleagues.
Of course.
Now, if Mr. Yeltsin's orders are obeyed, isn't Mr. Gorbachev impotent to do what he wants?
Well, absolutely. I mean, I actually have been saying for several days now that the key to all of this lies partly in the West, because the West is actually partly to blame. They've been sending the wrong messages to Gorbachev. They, in fact, have given him the green light to go ahead and do practically whatever he likes in the various republics, in the various so-called rebel republics, although we don't accept that term at all, of course. We have legal, democratically elected parliaments in those republics.
Nonetheless, no different message is getting through at the moment. Now, if you say he's simply threatening the republics, you'll see how far do you think it will go? Do you think he will really use force to quash the independence movement?
I believe he will go as far as he thinks he needs to go in order to keep the Soviet Union together. I believe he is firmly committed to that. He is
Despite
a communist
Yeltsin's
at heart.
message?
Despite Yeltsin's message, I think that may slow him down somewhat, of course, because I think, in a sense, the key to all of this actually is Russia and Yeltsin's response, and I'm very much heartened by that, as should, of course, the Bulls be today.
Yuri Khan in Moscow and from Estonia, are you intimidated by what has happened in Lithuania? Will you back down from your quest for independence?
Of course. It was very unexpectedly to us all this news about Lithuanian, and we hoped that Mr. Gorbachev have more civil chance to find out a solution for Baltics.
You're hopeful then. Mr. Bogdanas, joining us from Vilnius in the parliamentary building. What do you think will happen now? Romas Kinka says this is a classic Bolshevik technique to threaten and torture the victim, then go on further. Do you feel that things are going to get tougher there?
Yeah, I think that is something you should look as from the international point of view, because if we compare the 56 in Budapest, when the Soviet troops invaded Hungary in the shadow of Suez crisis, I would say that now the is looking at the Middle East, this time at Iraq and Kuwait. And the Soviets, we were expecting that the Soviet Union would try to do something in the Baltics in the shadow of the Gulf crisis.
But that is not an exact parallel, is it, Mr. Bogdanas, and indeed Mr. Kinka? Hungary was not part of the Soviet Union. The Baltics, although they have declared independence variously, still are, in Moscow's eyes, part of the Soviet Union.
I would like to say you that on March 11th we declared that we are restoring the independence. That's one thing, and the other thing, that we never joined the Soviet Union.
I understand
According to the Great Britain foreign policy, we are not the part of the Soviet Union.
Yes, and I should also add, of course, that Mr. Hurd has said just recently that we are a special case. and that in fact we have made concessions to the Soviet Union, and they should respond to those concessions by real and meaningful negotiations.
Have you any real hope of the West helping you in your quest at this time? Because we are in a very special
situation. I think the West
situation.
has to understand that if we go down, then in fact the Soviet Union goes down with us as well. And this will endanger and certainly will make East-West relations far more tense. It may not be a return to the Cold War exactly, but it certainly will make things a lot worse than they have been.
But you're talking about civil war within Lithuania.
No, I'm not. I certainly can talk in terms of civil war within Georgia, because the Georgians will respond, I would imagine, by fighting. The Lithuanians have chosen a peaceful path to full independence, but we do want the help of the West, and the West must understand it is in their own self-interest to help us.
Romas Kinka, Mr. Khan in Moscow, and Mr. Bogdanas in Vilnius, thank you very much indeed for joining. And that is almost it for this week, but with the latest news this Saturday evening, Edward Sturton.
The main news again. The United States has ordered most Iraqi diplomats to leave the country by January the 15th. Washington says this is to reduce the risk of Iraqi terrorist attacks in the event of hostilities in the Gulf. The UN Secretary-General, Javier Pérez de Cuellar, arrived in Baghdad this afternoon for talks tomorrow with the Iraqi leader Saddam Hussein. He said he had no specific proposals to avert war in the Gulf. And on this programme, former American National Security Advisor Richard Allen said the coalition against Saddam was looking risky and fragile. And while we've been on the air, it's been reported from Moscow that President Gorbachev has promised there'll be no more military action in Lithuania, at least for the time being. Mr. Gorbachev is reported to have announced his decision at a meeting of leaders of the 15 Soviet republics. Islam Karimov, the president of Uzbekistan, quoted Mr. Gorbachev as saying that until the situation in the Baltics was fully clarified, no more force would be used. Earlier, Soviet troops took over more key government buildings in the Lithuanian capital of Vilnius. The World This Week will be back with another special edition next week. By then, of course, the UN deadline for an Iraqi withdrawal from Kuwait will have expired. The next news on ITV is at 20 to 10. From us, good night.